What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another edition of SSPN Live. I'm Jude, that's Ethan, and we're here to talk some Spurs today. We're going to recap the Mavericks game from last night that neither of us unfortunately got to watch, but we did get to watch some highlights. We also had some friends who watched the game, gave us a little bit of intel, and so we'll break that down. Close loss there. Not the best game for Wemby and some other guys offensively, really the whole team, but still with the way that some of the other Mavericks games have gone this year. Well, let me actually, before I say that, I think a lot of them actually have been pretty close. Let me go ahead and look at the season
Not the last
series
one.
here. Okay, yeah, we did get blown out the last two. I'm just thinking of the season opener. So what I was about to say is, considering how some of the other Mavericks games have gone this year, Ethan, this was much better, just considering the fact that we were in the game until the fourth quarter. And we'll get into kind of the rest of it later. But after we get into this, because we've got and you've got some plans over the next couple days, I guess the next week, you could say. We're not going to be able to do any post games for Friday or the next two Suns games over the weekend and on Monday. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and break down basically the entire weekend and Monday of next week after we get into this Mavs game, and then we'll also answer some of y'all's questions as always. But with that being said, Ethan, I already got the box score up here. We'll go ahead and look at this. We do want to point out, Luka Doncic went 6 of 27, 2 of 12. Yes, he still found a way to get a triple-double, but he's Luka Doncic. Shooting-wise for him, as much as Jeremy Sohan went 4 for 15, 3 for 9, not the most efficient game for him, he was guarding Luka for most of the game and did a really good job, at least holding his shooting down. There's only so much that you're going to be able to stop with Luka. I don't know if you're ever going to be able to stop his playmaking, just with the way the Mavs offense works. And when you have Kyrie Irving next to him, who had 28, 7 and 3, had 2 steals as well. Didn't make a 3, but still an efficient night overall, 13 for 21. I just want to say that despite this loss and maybe Jeremy not having the best offensive game, that is probably one of the bright spots when it comes to this one, Ethan, is what he was able to do defensively against Luka Doncic, one of the league's best players.
Yeah, that's why he's on the team. Trey Jones spoke about it in his post-game press conference, how Jeremy has improved dramatically as a defender, especially since he's guarding the best matchup on every given night. And particularly with Luka, he's learned patience. He's not going for as many ball fakes, as many pass fakes. He's staying grounded and using his physicality and athleticism to just try and keep him, within the realm of like where we could still win the game. I think part of this is probably just Luka having a bad shooting night because you can't ever stop great players. But you still have to give Jeremy his props because this is what he does best. Right now, offensively, he's scoring almost by happenstance in transition, timely baskets, cuts to the basket, wide open threes. We're not necessarily drawing up any plays for him. So where he has to shine is on the defensive side of the court, and he did against the Mavericks.
Was also able to be a presence on the boards with 10 there. Showed off a little bit of his playmaking with 6 assists. That's the second most on the team. And that kind of brings me in to the next person that I want to talk about here in this game. And that's, of course, the leading scorer, Trey Jones. Also had 9 assists. Another 4 of 5 from 3 night, Ethan.
Yeah.
We're starting to see these more often. Like I don't know how I want to word this exactly. All I'll say is there is some promise when it comes to the development of Trey Jones' shot. I know a lot of people might deny that and shoo away because of the years of evidence prior, and I understand, but he's showing us some things lately that it seems like there's a real improvement, and I think he realizes how important that is for him just moving forward in his career, regardless if that's in San Antonio or not. But more importantly, 8 for 11 overall, distributed, was the leading scorer. And while he did give up a lot of buckets to Kyrie, first of all, I'm not expecting Trey Jones to stop Kyrie in isolation on any possession, if I'm just being completely honest. And if you're in that situation, the fact that he's able to match that with 22, I really don't have many complaints here from Trey. Obviously, I didn't watch the game, and you can criticize the defense, but when you consider the context, this is a really solid game from Trey, honestly.
Absolutely. And despite the possible defensive inefficiencies, he was still +7 in the box score. So a net overall positive from Trey Jones being on the court. I think the shooting thing is a matter of confidence. And he spoke to it a little bit again at his post-game presser, where he's just said, they're going to leave me wide open. I have to have the confidence to take those shots and make them at certain opportunities. So will he ever be a sniper? Is he going to shoot 45% from three in his career? Probably not, but can he be a threat? Can he be a Tyus Jones type who's developed that part of his game as well, kind of in a similar fashion? I think so. And I think we've kind of lost sight of that because of how the season has gone. But if you're telling me his ceiling is Tyus Jones as a extremely quality backup point guard and a guy that can take over at the starting spot, should your star point guard like John Morant get injured? Absolutely. And is that someone you want on your team? Absolutely. And he's always going to have that 9 assists to 1 turnover in his game. As far as being a field general, a guy that understands, has a high IQ for basketball, he's A1.
Yeah, and if you look at his stats this season, it doesn't look like anything too crazy. But you've also got to remember adding in Wemby, what that kind of does to the numbers. But still,
Mhm.
50% overall. In his last 10 games here, Ethan, you see his 3-point percentage is 46%. I mean,
I love it.
that and overall on the season, well, this is maybe, let me see. No. Yeah, that is the last 10. That's not just Memphis. I was just making sure there. And then this season overall, still up to 33.6%. So if we compare that to the rest of his career here, Ethan, let's see where that ends up stacking up. Other than
His
other than
rookie year.
2020, that doesn't count. But yeah, this is a steady increase, a 5% increase in his percentage. And the other thing that we forget about all of these guys, Ethan, on this team is they're still 24. You know, I mean, not everybody on the team, but Trey Jones is still 24. And as much as it feels like we know what Trey Jones is at this point in his career, Ethan, this is why whenever we made that recent video where we talked about, we made the clip of it and then we also did it in the podcast, whether or not the Spurs would make a big move this offseason. This is this is an example of development and the pros of maybe just keeping everything the way that it's been going into next season. Now, that doesn't address the other side of that argument, which you can go check out that video. We're not going to dive into all of that again right now. But with how good Wemby is, you
Mm.
want someone who maybe might be a little bit more proven, not just somebody who's just beginning to show flashes because of how good Victor already is. But if you want to look into the pros and cons and hear that whole argument, go check out our clip. It should be like our second video that we've posted right now. I did the film review of Alex Sarr. Go check that out as well. But before that, it should be, will the Spurs make a big move this offseason? So go check out that whole conversation. But regardless, this is still, 46% over his last 10 games, Ethan.
Yeah,
That's kind of undeniable at this point.
for sure. I'm excited to see what he can finish the season off at. I wish we could record. We probably can. Just like his percentage since the All-Star break once the season ends. I think that'll be a good stat for Trey Jones moving into the offseason.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I was getting some music in my ears again, Ethan.
All good, all good. I didn't hear it on
I
this.
just I just can't stop it. Yeah, I did. We did check it right this time. If you guys have been watching some of the other streams where we've accidentally played some Burger King ads, y'all have got a little taste of that.
Mm.
But regardless, going back to that Mavs game, a really good game from him. And as much as some other guys didn't have the most efficient night, still Devin Vassell with 19. It's another example of how when his shot isn't going, or his 3-point shot isn't going. Excuse me, and I'll get the box score up here again in just a second. But he also had 3 steals last night. And that's something that we're starting to see become a trend for him a little bit more as well. I know once again, we just mentioned we watched the highlights a little bit, but what were your thoughts on Devin last night?
I think, like you said, being able to make an impact despite not hitting threes with 9 field goals of 2-point shots is impressive to get to that 19-point mark. We talk about him getting as close to 20 as he possibly can on a game by game basis, and he's proven that he can do that even without his 3-point shot. To also have 6 rebounds from the guard position is impressive. I think defensively he had a pretty nice game. I'd like to know exactly at what point those 3 turnovers from him came, because as a team we had 15 to their 9. And honestly, 3 turnovers for Devin's a little uncommon. I feel like he's usually on the lower spectrum of that. We had 5 from
Yes.
Wemby, obviously 2 from Jeremy, and then it kind of scattered around from the rest of the team. So I'm curious if that was a first quarter stat or something that came late in the game that maybe have cost us. I wouldn't know because I didn't watch the full game live. But if you guys know in the comments, please let us know. That's something that I was intrigued about.
Yeah, and just talking about the game a little bit, Ethan. Um, and obviously, like you just mentioned, a couple good things about Devin here. Let me get that box score back up. Um, it seems like if you look at the quarter by quarter scoring, right, the biggest deficit is in the first quarter.
Yep.
And I like that he got 3 assists. I like the rebounds as well that he has
Mhm.
there, and still an efficient night overall. And we'll get to Wemby here in a second because really we were talking about this pregame, not to jump all over the place here, but you can chalk up this loss if you want to, only losing by what? If I can do some math here, by 6. Wemby shoots 3 for 13, only has 12. That's not a normal Wemby night. If he plays, anything, even if he just goes, 8 for 13, that could be the difference. I know that's simplifying things, but if you've watched the Spurs this season, when you have a game where Trey Jones has 22 and Devin has 19, and you still have multiple other double digit scores in Keldon, Malachi Branham, and Jeremy, if Victor has his normal night, they probably pull it off. And that's why the score was as close as it was, despite him not having his best game. But still 6 blocks. And he's got 13 blocks in the last 2 games, as Victor
Mhm.
Wembanyama just said in the comments a little while ago. So, I mean, the defensive impact is always there. But going back to the quarter by quarter point, 38 to 30 to start, I had a text from a friend that said the Mavs scored 20 in the first 5 minutes. Um, so obviously, that's not how you want to start the game if you're the Spurs. But considering that you did that and then you only lost the first quarter by 8, and then you really stiffened up the rest of the game, a 1 point difference in the second quarter, 2 point difference in the third quarter, another 1 point difference in the fourth. Um, as much as they weren't able to pull it out, Ethan, that defensive change, like that's not
Mhm.
something that was happening earlier in the year. And it, when you look at the rosters of these teams, people can say, "Oh, you're making excuses," but it's just like bluntly, the 15-54 San Antonio Spurs are not going to be able to outscore this Mavericks team at this point in the Spurs development. If we're just being real here. So to see the defensive change and the fact that they were basically able to go, really, if you want to add it up, they won the game in the final 3 quarters combined, even if it's a
Mhm.
slim margin. Um, that's a positive that I see.
Absolutely. To be able to make an adjustment in that first quarter, not get overly flustered or give in, but then compete for the next 3 quarters in a row and sustain that adjustment is a huge change from earlier in the year and something that we haven't really seen all that much. So I agree with what you're saying. It's that in itself is a win for the Spurs.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a lot of good things from Malachi in the highlights, a lot of good off ball movement, backdoor cuts, had an
Hmm.
efficient night, was able to get on the boards as well. Just seemed like a solid night from Malachi. Didn't try to do too much, but contributed in the way that we want him to. And
Yeah.
looking at Keldon, you made a great point before we went on air. As much as this could be a game where, like, if Keldon gets up to 20, that could also be the difference in a game like this. If Wemby has his normal game, this is like a really solid Keldon Johnson stat line, especially when you consider that Malachi is also scoring off the bench. Because Keldon, if Malachi is in rhythm, you want both of those guys to be varied. Where if Malachi's off, Keldon gets a couple more shots and maybe gets 20 anyway, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. But still, 50% overall, 50% from 3 again, which I like to see. We've been seeing some 3-point improvements from Keldon as well over the past probably 10 games, and 6 boards, 2 assists, just doing his normal thing. Um, that like you said, that's the type of game you want from Keldon on a normal night.
For sure, not to mention his 6 rebounds and 2 assists. I don't think he's to blame at all for this loss. Malachi, to speak on him, I'm very glad that he had a decent game. Like he's had a few bad ones in a row since he had that unbelievable surge where you and the rest of our comments were giving me props for being a prophet because I had mentioned after post All-Star break, like Malachi Branham's going to go crazy. And he did for like, what, 3 to 5 games, and
Right.
then plummeted back to his worst version of himself. And now to get 11 points, 4 rebounds, an assist, efficient shooting, wasn't forcing anything, in the right place at the right time, made the right extra pass, got easy dunks down the lane, and was also able to knock down a three and be +5 in the box score. Like, this is what we need from Malachi on a daily basis. This is not too high, not too low. This is like a steady diet of statistical impact that we'd like to see from him moving forward.
Absolutely. And Victor brings up a good comment here. He says, "I honestly think that the missed three Trey Jones had against the Bucks when Wemby passed it to Jones for the game winner and he missed. He says it made him more focused on working on his shooting."
Mm,
Um, I
perhaps.
think I think that's actually, as much as some people might say that's like reading into things too much. I think that's a good point because there I remember that game and I remember specifically like I had a friend say, "I think that shot should determine whether Trey Jones is
Mm,
on the team moving forward." And we don't. That's obviously just us, joking in a group chat. But at the same time, I think that that's a moment that can kind of be like a light bulb, for guys
yeah.
to be like, okay, wow, I really do need to do this. And that's why I mentioned earlier, you kind of mentioned the Tyus Jones comparison. That's why I mentioned earlier that he's somebody, we don't know where his development, we don't know where his ceiling is at as much as it feels like we kind of do.
Mm.
um but I'm losing my train of thought mid sentence. Ethan, remind me where I'm at. I'm sorry.
You're talking about his development and how we kind of ignored that earlier in the season, but now looking at his improvement as a shooter. I don't know what you were leading to. Like,
Dang it.
maybe he has more room for growth than even we were giving him credit for, something to that extent.
That can kind of work, to be honest, but
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just completely lost where
No,
I
you're
was
fine. You're
at
fine.
right there.
I
I
think,
know I was talking about Trey Jones.
yeah.
um we were talking about the shot and how that can be a light bulb moment.
Yes.
um this is what it was, and this is what I said earlier. For his career moving forward,
Mm,
he needs to be a better shooter, to want to continue his career and play in this league, regardless of whether that's in San Antonio or not. That's what it is, Ethan.
correct. And I think he even talked about this a little bit, how he was like, there was an adjustment that had to be made. He was like, I'd have to realize that playing with Victor Wembanyama, I'm going to get a lot more open shots, and they're leaving me open on purpose. So I have to take them, and that's a detail I left out earlier when I discussed his post game presser. But that's big, and I think anybody can improve as a shooter. We've seen guys, as Spurs fans, we've seen 100 guys come through the Spurs system that weren't
Hmm.
known as shooters, but they're playing next to Tim Duncan and David Robinson, and them. It's like, okay, they have
Kawhi.
to improve. Kawhi Leonard, I think immediately Steve Smith, who was not a shooter when he came to the Spurs, he was really a point guard with post up ability, and he's talked about it before on talk shows. And Pop was like, "No, you stay in the corner." When Tim Duncan needs you, you take the shot. So he had to work on that aspect of his game, and he basically became a 3 and D wing later in his career. So it's definitely something that Trey is addressing, and I think will hopefully, knock on wood, become a strength down the road.
Yeah, and like we were talking about with Victor's comment earlier about the Bucks game, that could have been a light bulb moment, like you were
Mhm.
just saying, where like, hey, regardless of where I'm at moving forward in my career, teams are going to do this to me. And I don't want to be the reason that my team, lost a game because shooting isn't my strength. And as A Spleen says here, he says, IMO. I think that's what he meant to say there. It's IMHO, but I'm sure he was saying, in my opinion, he can
Uh,
improve his shooting. It's pretty possible. His shooting form is fast enough. That's the other thing I will say also about Trey Jones's form. It's not significantly different, but there are some minor tweaks this season. And over the past 10 games, when we've been talking about in the percentage, you've been seeing way more swishes. And that's why you've been seeing these random 4 for 5 games or stuff like that.
mm-hmm.
So, we still have Trey Jones. We signed him to a 2-year extension, about $9 million next season. Obviously, Blake Wesley, there's still so much potential with him too. But the Spurs have a lot of options because if Trey Jones is going to develop like this, maybe you do want him to be your backup point guard next season, and you can still keep Blake if you want to, and then
Mm-hmm.
if Trey has some struggles, they can just compete. And then finally, when you really get to the point where you feel like you can make a decision, you could do that next year at the deadline if you wanted to, because Trey Jones would then be in his expiring year.
Mhm.
That's really into the weeds and way down the line. We'll have to see what happens in this offseason first. But what I'm saying is this development is a good sign, and it gives the Spurs some versatility on their options moving forward.
Hell, we don't have to get too into the weeds here, like you said. But if Chetty Osman ends up leaving, which I think we all assume he will after this season, there's an opportunity for the backup lineup, assuming we draft a point guard and then don't sign anybody else, that the bench unit could be Trey Jones, Blake Wesley, Malachi Keldon, and then Zach, Dom, Bassie, whoever at the 5 spot. Because we've seen Keldon play the 4 before, and he's basically the same as Chetty Osman, just a couple inches shorter.
He's only one, really.
Well, yeah, 1 inch shorter. So, like,
Yeah.
what's the problem with that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, there's really not much difference. I mean, Chetty's really a natural 3-2, and
Mhm.
I know we've been against that in the past, and I still think Keldon is a natural 3 for sure. But
Agreed.
the bench role also kind of changes things a little bit. You're not having to go up against the same caliber of talent or the same size. But like in the Nets game when we won, we were playing him at the 4 off the bench in some rotations. Why? Because he can match up with Dorian Finney-Smith or
Mm.
Cam Johnson. Those guys, he's able to physically be able to work with those guys, and he's not at a super giant height advantage like he was. Like, imagine if we're playing him at the 4 like we were in the DeJounte DeMar days, and we have to go play the Jazz,
Mhm.
with Laurie Markkinen and Walker Kessler. Like, that's where we get big problems with that there. When he's playing off the bench against other, in favorable matchups, he's somebody who can still be effective there. And it's still definitely a small ball lineup. Any small ball lineup like that, it's not like we're putting Keldon back to the basket every play,
No. Yeah.
and making him shoot mid-range jumpers. Like
Mhm.
he's still spreading out the floor, moving in transition, and playing off ball as well.
And we could have someone else at the 4 if we really have to. I only said
Right.
that lineup because then we can keep playing Blake Wesley and Trey, and then elevate a rookie point guard or maybe trade for somebody. I don't know. We'll see. We don't really know what's going to happen.
But that's a really good point that you bring that up because there has been a little bit of experimentation with Blake at the 2, and
Hmm.
I think he also has the size for it as
For
well.
sure.
So, maybe if I don't. We'll see. We could dive into the weeds. I was about to say, maybe if they have to make a decision between Malachi and Blake, that could, also answer that question. But lots of stuff jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves there,
We are.
Ethan.
We are.
Lots of stuff to play out before those conversations even become possible. But the last thing we'll talk about here on this Mavs game before we move into the Grizzlies and the Suns preview, Ethan, was Zach Collins was out of the game. I see some people asking in the comments. So initially it was reported that he woke up and was just feeling sick. So he was going to be out. And they had to call Barlow back up from the G League as he had already gone down to the Rio Grande Valley as that's the Houston's G League team. And that's who the Austin Spurs were going to play. And he had to be bussed back because Zach woke up feeling not well. But it found out the reason he was not feeling well is he banged his head during the Brooklyn game and he felt like it was fine, but the symptoms were just a little bit delayed. He ended up having a concussion.
Mm.
So I'm not exactly sure how long Zach is out. I'm going to go ahead and look at the injury report for these next games. But that means that we are probably going to be seeing some Dominic Barlow minutes moving forward here, Ethan. Zach Collins is a game time decision for March 22nd. So that would be this Friday. So there might be a chance that he plays. So actually, scratch what I just said. Um, but if he is out, that probably means we will see Dominic Barlow again, who had 5 assists last night. Nothing crazy on the stat sheet, but actually, what I saw in the highlights, and granted, they're just highlights, Ethan. And you can talk about his rebounding as well, because I believe you mentioned he only had 1 board
Hmm.
last night. There's a lot of tip outs that Barlow does, and also some other things that he affects that I've talked about ad nauseum. You can even go back to the 20-minute breakdown I did last year to kind of talk about how there's things that he does that don't show up on the stat sheet, and that's why
Hmm.
the Spurs have elevated his contract and kept him around. Um, but with all of that being said, it seemed like from what I saw from the highlights, it was actually a pretty solid performance from him.
Yeah, I mean, he's always active. He's always fighting for extra possessions, like you said. He only had 1 rebound, but I think those tip backs, like you're saying, and just fighting for positioning, it allows other players to get rebounds, like Keldon, who had 6, and big
Devin,
Devin, who also was 6 for Devin as well, I think. So he opens up space for everybody else. He stays out of others' way. He doesn't force shots like we've always talked about. Very athletic, runs the floor well in transition. Against the Grizzlies, I'm not sure what his impact will be. Don Barlow is one of those guys that like you know he's going to give you everything that I just said. You just don't really know to what extent he's going to give it to you because he could get you 20 like at random. Like he could start knocking down mid-range jumpers. He could get you 10 rebounds because of his raw athleticism, or he can do what he did against the Mavericks, which is basically just not getting anyone's way and make the energy play to open up things for the rest of the guys.
Yeah, and the other thing that's cool about that, as much as like we've seen the rebounding stuff, and we kind of just addressed how there's some nuances to that,
Mm-hmm.
but the playmaking, we saw some
Yeah.
flashes from that earlier in the year, and the
Mm-hmm.
fact that there's not a drop off in that with Zach being out, with how well that's been looking as of late, with using him as a hub, that's really good to see as well. Because I mean, when you're hitting back doors or you're finding Malachi in the left corner, and you're reading the floor like that,
Mm-hmm.
that's what you want to do in that situation when you're coming in and you're Dominic Barlow, to be blunt. Like you said, you don't want to step on people's toes, et cetera, et cetera. Not a perfect game, but also showed some flashes of why we've elevated him to the contract.
For sure. And just to give everyone an example of kind of what we're talking about. So this game, he had 4 points, 5 assists, 1 rebound. The last game against Denver, he had less minutes, but had 6 points, 6 rebounds, 1 assist. But if you go back to the last game, he had meaningful minutes. He had 30 against the Warriors when we won 126 to 113. He had 19 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists. So like
Right.
that's the spectrum of what he's able to give you on any given night. And it's going to be up and down because of the nature of who he is right now in his career. He's just a young player. He's still figuring
20.
things out, 20 years old, still very raw despite the leaps in improvement, especially I think IQ wise, the biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but who knows? It depends on how many minutes he gets, and or if he plays at all. Like you said, Zach Collins might be back by that point.
Yeah, but I like what you said there. As much as some people might look at this and be like, "What? Dom Barlow can get you 20." Like you use the
Yeah.
example there, but the thing is, it's kind of like with Trey Jones, the conversation we were just having. If they leave him open for mid-range jumpers and he's hot, not
Hmm.
every night he's on. You know what I mean? Just because of the nature of who he is right now, like you were saying, he can knock down some shots. But anyways, Ethan, there's one more big that I also want to talk about on the Spurs roster,
Mm.
and maybe Ethan, maybe Friday if Zach Collins doesn't play, it may not be Barlow, because Charles Bassey has
Ooh.
now been elevated off injury reserve after his ACL tear, and he was actually listed as doubtful in the last game, and it looks like he's not even on the injury report here, Ethan. Let me go ahead and just scroll down to get the full details before we confirm that. No, he is listed as out still. This says he'll miss the remainder of the season, but there's been some tweets, Ethan. I know I'm saying that right now, but I'm telling you, go look at the injury report. Last game, he was listed as doubtful. You would think that he would be out, but I think that was just the initial reporting that they
Mm.
did. That's just something to keep an eye on. Maybe he doesn't play, but there's been a lot of San Antonio reporters that have been talking about the potential of him coming back that
Mm.
I've been seeing uh, that I've been seeing on Twitter.
At least you know he's still part of the team, right? Like he's been active, like unlike Kem Birch and other guys that we've had in the past. Like we see him on the bench, we see him at Spurs events on the social media, so we know he's a Spur, right? And he's one of those guys that you honestly forget about because of the nature of the season, how bad it's been from top to bottom, and how quickly he was injured. I think he could help us out a lot, honestly. I know Zach's on the bench right now as that center spot, so who knows if he'd even be getting playing time right now? Like, that's a question we forgot to even ask. Like, when Zach got moved to the bench, what would that have done to Charles Bassey had he been healthy? You know
I
what I mean?
think he probably. I totally get what you're saying, and I'm surprised we haven't gotten to this yet because I've had this internal monologue with myself.
Mm,
Um, to be honest, I think we'd probably just use Bassey as a backup five, and then or a third string five,
third
excuse
string
me,
five. That's what I
and
think too.
and then kind of we would use him like Barlow,
Mm,
in the sense that like if Zach gets in foul trouble or he's having a bad game, sit him, bring in Charles.
Yeah,
Maybe we would try some front court minutes with them together, but I just don't see it.
I don't see it working either. Because as much as I like Charles Bassey, he's not as like Dominic Barlow at power forward next to Zach isn't perfect, but it's also he has way more mobility. He's a way better
Yes.
perimeter defender than Charles Bassey ever will be. Charles Bassey's advantage is when we play big physical centers that just push Zach Collins or around or just way taller than Don Barlow, who I think 6'9", maybe 6'10". So he's not without his advantages. I hope he comes back so we can just kind of see what he's got in his tank because it's been so long since we've seen him. But that being said, I'm not going to overinflate his possible impact on the team because it might be minimal.
Yeah. Charles Bassey, if you ever watch this, I love your physicality. I love the energy you play with, and you have a pretty awesome story.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from Nigeria, I believe, and then also growing up in San Antonio as well.
Absolutely.
But I love Victor's comment here. Bassey is our version of DeJuan Blair and Malik Rose.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, I don't notice the Malik Rose as much, but I definitely notice the shades of DeJuan Blair for sure. He's a little bit bigger than DeJuan,
Yeah.
but you're mentioning the matchups too. There would be some teams where I just wouldn't mind playing him off the bench over Zach
Yeah.
because he wouldn't get bullied as much.
Absolutely. It's the old Cowboys from the 70s when they had two quarterbacks, and depending on which team they played, they chose Roger Staubach or whatever the other guy's name was. I can't remember his name.
White, I think Danny White.
Danny White, something like that. Yeah. So it could be one of those situations. And a lot of people I'm seeing in the comments just want Zach gone. I don't know if that's going to happen because of the nature of his contract. And, he's a veteran center that isn't without his positives. We all need to give Zach his flowers too. But the DeJuan Blair point is funny. You know what's even, you want to hear my toxic take here, Jude? This is
Go
my, like,
ahead. Go
my
ahead.
dad and I growing up watching the Spurs, we both, and this could be just like how your dad has an opinion on something as a kid, you just like jump to it, you don't even
Right,
think
you
about
just
it.
agree with it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
we both hated DeJuan Blair. We thought he
I
was the
love DeJuan Blair.
we both were like, he's so overrated. He's just a chubby guy. He can't dribble. He's like short. Like we hated him so much. Um, but like I'm thinking now, my dad also hated Tiago Splitter and he also hated Boris Diaw. But I love both of those guys. Boris Diaw is actually probably my favorite player of all
Right.
time. Um, but yeah, I never understood the DeJuan Blair hype.
I just liked him as a physical presence off
He
the
was
bench.
physical.
That's what I remember, to be honest. I think it was more that we had some injuries and he
Mm,
was just coming in and giving us like some good hustle minutes.
yeah.
So it was like this was back in the day when the Spurs were winning, Ethan. So we could kind of overlook all of DeJuan Blair's flaws
Mhm.
potentially and just be like, he's got that muscle inside.
But I think maybe it's because like he's like the stereotypical Spurs player that was good with the Spurs that signed somewhere else and just was awful. Remember how bad he was on the Mavericks?
Here's what
Oh,
Martian
here
Murray
we go.
says. I liked Blair until he started getting. It was a major fall off, man. It really was.
Hmm.
But I have some fond memories of being a young kid. And I just remember watching him off the bench, be like, yeah.
He started for a little bit. Remember, like him and Timmy started as the front court for like a season,
I'm
or like
forgetting
half a
about that.
season.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
This Charles Bassey segment turned into the DeJuan Blair segment.
it really did. What a name.
Let's do 15 minutes on Aaron Baines.
Okay, Aaron Baines. Rip Aaron Baines, man. Honestly, sad story. He's not dead. He's not.
Oh, okay, okay. I thought you
But
meant like he
he
actually.
almost died.
I
Remember?
remember that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think his career is like over now, which sucks.
I think I saw that he actually might be playing in the Australian League, but I could
Is
be
he
wrong
now?
on
I
that.
hope so because
I
he
think
was
he
like
is.
an
Let me go look
actually
that up.
quality backup big for a couple years there, and then he just had that horrible accident. I'm sorry, my
Yes.
dog is freaking
No,
out.
you're 100% good. He is playing in the
Oh,
NBL
thank God.
for the Brisbane Bullets as of right now at 37. But I think this is like his first year back. Let me see. Or no. Okay. Okay. So after suffering a career-threatening spinal cord injury during the Tokyo Olympics, Baines returned to professional basketball by signing a 2-year deal with the Brisbane Bullets of the National Basketball League on July 28th, 2022. Um, He got suspended for unsportsmanlike conduct after getting ejected. That's in there. So he's still got that fire. But listen to this. Okay, he was actually the highest paid player in the NBL last season.
Wow, good for him. Okay,
So
maybe not sad.
he only averaged 13 minutes a game over the first half of the season, but I mean, dude's still getting the bag.
More power to him, ex-Spur. The legend after the 2013 finals, the video of Tim Duncan carrying a drunk Aaron Baines out of a bar in Miami. Have you seen that video?
I've not. I need to.
After we lost in Game 7, it is so funny. The fans are like videoing him, and he was like, "Hey, go Spurs, go!" And Aaron Baines, like, "Thanks, man!" And he's like plastered, and Timmy's just carrying him out of the bar.
They're all hurt. They're all crying.
Yeah, pretty much. It's legendary. I'll send it to you.
Oh my gosh. I know we just said that we weren't going to do any more segments like that, but I'm glad we just talked about Aaron Baines for as long as we did.
We did, yeah, worth it. We should do this every podcast. It's like a random Spur.
We should have that. That'll be an off-season segment. Y'all be on the lookout for it.
Stay tuned for the Jay Simmons episode. It's an hour long.
My boy Jay Sims, the GOAT. If Jay Sims never left San Antonio, he'd be remembered as one of the best role players. No.
Honestly, low key.
No, but on the Spurs, bro, anyways.
Yeah, we'll get into it in the offseason.
But Jay Sims was that guy back in the day, and Orlando gave him the bag, so he's winning at the end of the day.
True.
Let's get back on track here, Ethan.
Yeah,
let's talk about this Grizzlies game this Friday.
Okay, let's do it.
What are your thoughts?
Winnable game, I would say.
Right.
They're without a lot of their players. There's some on the screen there: Yuta Watanabe, Brandon Clark. More importantly, Ja Morant. I think Marcus Smart will be playing, but you can't overlook the Memphis Grizzlies because they're still a very well-coached team with some quality role players and veteran players like a Marcus Smart, like a Santi Aldama, like Gigi Jackson.
Yeah.
Like they'll play 120%. Like right now, they're giving me flashbacks to the grit and grind Grizzlies that used to give us so much trouble back when they had Zebo, Marcus All, Mike Conley.
Mm-hmm.
They're playing with that kind of grit and intensity. So they're not a team that we can just walk in there and expect to win. Like they'll stop on our throat. But we are at home. We do have the greatest French player of all time and Victor Wembanyama on our team. And I don't think they have anyone size-wise that can really match up with him. Oh, Desmond Bane is also back. I just saw that in the comments, so we got to watch him. I think if our guys come out with the same intensity and the same mindset that we've been doing the past couple of games, we'll be okay. I think we can compete and possibly win this game. It's within reach.
If you look at, as much as Memphis leads the series 2-0, if you look at those two games, both very competitive games for the Spurs, and as much as the Spurs are 15-54, I still think at this point of the season, they are much better than they were in the last two matchups. There's been at least 2 months since the last matchup in January, and the last one was back when Victor was still playing the 4 next to Zach. So I will say it looks like Santi Aldama will probably at least be back for the Friday game, and that's some size. Now, I'm not saying he's going to out-physical Victor, but that is somebody who, at least can contest some of his shots better than other guys.
Jaren Jackson Jr., I can't believe I forgot him.
Right. You definitely can't forget their best defender, best player, I was also going to say, I mean, it seems like he always kind of plays hard against the Spurs, and I'm sure it's because of his dad. And him and Pop usually have conversations, after the game. And I'm sure Pop knew him, when he was a little kid to an extent. So I think that always adds a little bit of extra juice to Jaren Jackson's games against us as well.
I forgot all about JJJ, and he's one of my favorite players.
He's a dude. Believe.
Yeah. I mean, that'll be a fun matchup regardless. Just watching him and Wemby go at each other, probably like a 10-block game between the two of them. So yeah, it'll be fun. I still think it's within reach.
Yeah, I think it should be a competitive game for the Spurs, and I think it would be really nice if they could pull this one out. This is the last game that they have against the Grizzlies at home. These are one of the teams close to the bottom of the West that you want to try to take advantage of, especially with it getting closer and closer, Ethan. It's getting harder and harder for the Spurs to potentially have a worse record than they did last season and potentially the worst record in franchise history. If you don't want that to happen, this is one that you need to win.
Well, we need 8 more wins, right? We have 13 games left in the season.
Yeah, something like that.
So it's like 8 and
It's unlikely. It's very
yeah,
unlikely.
I don't
But
know.
I don't think it's going to I wasn't trying to suggest that it's going to happen, Ethan. I'm
Yeah.
just saying if they do want it to happen, this is one that you got to win.
Oh, absolutely. That point I will agree with. Yes, sir.
That's what I was trying to say. I hope that it did come out different. But there's something else I was also going to say. Oh, of course, Ethan. We've done this whole segment. We are avoiding former Spur Lamar Stevens.
Thank God. That's one of those guys, man. That's one of them. That's one of them boys that'll go
That would have
crazy
been a
about you.
revenge game for Lamar, man.
It really would have. It really would have.
The day we have to play Lamar Stevens, Chandler Hutchinson,
Oh,
and
Kem Birch.
you could throw Cam. I was trying to think of somebody else that we just had on contract in the offseason who never who we cut before the season started, but I couldn't. So
This
Kem
season?
Birch works. No, just in overall in the
Oh,
past.
Al-Farouq Aminu.
There you go. Yes, and Al-Farouq Aminu.
Mm.
There'd be problems.
Big problems. A lot of length on that team. A lot of dog.
So I wish we had more analysis for this one, but I think you guys kind of get the point. This is probably one of the more winnable games for the Spurs left on the schedule. Point blank, period.
Agreed.
But it's not going to be easy, especially with Desmond Bane back. That is a very good point. But the Grizzlies are on a 3-game losing streak, so maybe we can extend that to 4. The only team they've beaten in the past 5 games is the Washington Wizards, and while they have played the Thunder twice, they also did lose. They did get blown out by the Hornets. So,
well, fingers crossed.
That's really all we can say about it, Ethan. But that brings us into these next 2 Suns games. And like we were talking about earlier, we won't be able to do either of these, unfortunately, post-games wise. But we will, I'm sure, sometime next week come back and recap them. But, Ethan, I was about to be like, this is going to be a really tough game for the Spurs. But we're 2-0 against the Suns, Ethan. We forget about that back-to-back. No problem.
The Keldon
that
Johnson,
was when we were winning the championship earlier this year.
I remember that. We were so hyped after those 2 wins because we were 3-1 at that point or something.
We were
like that?
3-2 or something. I made a reaction video and I felt like this is like this is how this team can play at its best, and that's not what happened whatsoever. We just caught the Suns early in the season before Bradley Beal was playing, and they're still kind of learning each other.
Yeah. The Suns are sort of kind of on a roll right now. Like they're 2-3 in the last 5, so I don't even know if I want to count that as a roll. But they did just finish. Oh wait, no, I'm looking at the wrong part of the schedule, huh?
Here, let's go to the standings.
Yeah, that's probably smart. They're kind of up and down, but Nurkic has been playing a lot better. He's been going crazy on the boards recently.
They're 5-5 in their last 10.
Yeah, it's kind of middle of the pack. I think one of these is honestly within grasp. Because, like you said, they're still learning to gel with each other. They haven't had that many games as the 3 of them. I'm talking about Durant, Booker, and Beal. I am scared about Jusuf Nurkic, though. I know he's not mobile. I know he's not going to defend Wemby necessarily, but he had 20 boards 2 games ago against Boston and 21 against Charlotte in back-to-back games. And then Grayson Allen is always going to be a wild card for them. What are we going to let their others do? They just signed Isaiah Thomas to a 10-day contract, and it'll be so Spurs if we let Isaiah Thomas, old little boy.
I already saw it. As soon as you brought it up, I put my hands over my face because my mind is going exactly to what you're about to say.
I could just see him like everyone talking about his first game back as a member of the NBA, and he gets 30 on us and just pick and rolls us to death with Nurkic. And then you got on the wings, you got Beal, KD, and Booker. Like, yeah, that's yeah, the Nurkic 31 boards against Chet. There's a couple wild cards there that I'm hoping don't pan out for the Phoenix Suns, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say we win at least one of these games.
I don't think that's that crazy to say, especially considering, like, I know it was the beginning of the season and there's kind of some asterisks there, but we're not 2-0 against. Yeah. Are we 2-0 against anybody?
Probably not.
Exactly. So that kind of gives me some confidence, and the fact that they're both at home, the nature of just it being the end of the year. Maybe one of the games, Phoenix. I mean, they're kind of still in the race, so I don't know if they're going to want to rest anybody. But maybe because there's two games in San Antonio, they're not back to back, but they're 2 games straight. Maybe they rest guys one game just because it's the Spurs and they feel like, hey, we can still win with D-Book or Brad Beal, and rest KD or whoever, whatever combination you want to throw of resting one of the big three in there. Obviously, I have no intel on that. We don't know for sure if that's going to happen. It's just because it's the 2 games back to back in San Antonio. You
Mm.
sometimes see that, but they're
You,
also in the thick of the playoff race.
I was about to say, I think they might not rest because they're only a game or like half a game away from the 6th spot. So, like, if I'm the Suns management, I'm like, okay, we're playing the crappy
Right.
Spurs. Let's go all out. Let's guarantee 2 wins so we can at least try and jump to the 7 and then make a push for that 6th seed.
And you don't want to have a losing record against the Spurs team if you're
No.
the Suns. Because if you're the Suns and you lose in the play in or you miss out on the play in somehow, and then you
Mhm.
look back on your schedule and you're like, wow, we went 3-1 against the Spurs. Like, I know it's still Victor, but the Spurs are one of the bottom 3 teams in the league right now, record
Yeah.
wise. And when you're fighting for a play-in spot, that's something that you can point to.
I think, honestly, just to say something that actually is an analysis of our team against the Suns, our bench is going to have to be big because notoriously, with the big three, and really the big four, if you count Nurkic in that starting lineup, they don't have a lot of depth, especially when you bring in Isaiah Thomas on a 10-day. Like, they're searching for some
Right.
spark off the bench. So we need Keldon Johnson, we need Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley, Shetty Osman, and them boys to have really good nights against the Suns for us to have a chance.
Yeah, another thing that A Spleen reminds us of is in that first game against the Suns, Devin Booker did not play. And of
True.
course, Bradley Beal was out also. So the Suns are a very different team than when we played them the first time, but also we are as well, because
Yeah.
that was like the first week of the season. So it'll be intriguing, but I don't think you're crazy, Ethan, for thinking that the Spurs have a chance to split this, especially with it being at
I appreciate that sentiment, Jude.
home. I'm trying to think. Oh, Isaiah Thomas. So for
Mm.
y'all that don't know, he played in the G League for like a week or maybe 2, and he was just going completely off. Um, I think he probably does still have a place in the league. I don't know if it's necessarily a rotation player, but when you're just scoring like 30 plus 10 assists every game in the G League, like you can still play. So, and like you said, it would just be so Spursy if he came in and like gave us 20 or something,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Just torched us.
But also, he's 5'9". So maybe Wemby swats him every time he tries to shoot.
That'd be cool. Blake Wesley's locking up. What am I thinking? Blake Wesley's on him. We're fine. Blake is locking up.
What if we're not though?
We're fine, Jude. We are fine. It's Blake.
uh, the thing is, like, I agree with you, but I
Yeah,
I
there's
could
still that
just I
fear.
could just see Isaiah Thomas, like, and it not even necessarily being Blake's fault. It just be Isaiah Thomas going on a heater, like reverting to old Celtics IT.
Yep. He's gonna have that classic Kobe 60-point game for his last game of his career where, like, he's gonna shoot the ball 30 times and just completely torch us.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean the boards will be important, like you said, for sure, with the way that Nurkic is playing. Um, we'll probably need some other guys to be a force on the boards as well. And when you talk
Jeremy.
about the bench, Jeremy, even Keldon, Devin to an
Mhm.
extent, we were talking about how their boards have been going up. And we'll see how the Zach thing plays out. But this would be a game, Ethan, where like it would be nice to have Charles Bassey because I think he could help. You're talking about the bench. I think he would really help with the physicality. And even if you want to stagger some minutes, where he can have some minutes against Nurkic, just like 3 minutes, and then you can, sub in Wemby, just so, it's not like Wemby has to go up against 280-pound Yusuf the whole night.
Yeah. Real quick, Jude, I have to check something
You're
about
good.
the Suns. Who is their backup center? Is it my guy? Is he playing?
I think he is.
Let me go to their last game.
He
Box
should.
score. Let's see. Yes, sir. It's my boy Drew Eubanks. He had 4 points last game. He's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Are we okay? We need
Yes,
Zach to stay out.
because
Here's
he's gonna
why.
get dunked on.
I sure. Where that works, but where I was going was we need Barlow versus Eubanks.
Oh, we do need that. Yes, it's our sons. Our
Eh,
sons are going up against each other.
we need to pit them against each other, and we need to watch them for entertainment.
I like this idea.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm a big fan of this.
Uh, all jokes there, guys. With that comment, just letting y'all know.
I'm not
But
joking.
no, that would be fun. But seriously, Dom versus Drew would be a trip for
This might
sure.
be the first time I don't root for Don Barlow.
That's crazy, Ethan. You're rooting against the Spurs.
It's my boy Drew Eubanks, man.
That's tough. That's tough.
It's
He's
literally
right here on my wall.
he's so relatable. My biggest regret about meeting Keldon Johnson is that I didn't ask him about Drew Eubanks because I know they're like actually good friends.
Mhm.
So I'm so upset that I wasn't like, bro, my favorite player is Drew Eubanks, because I'm sure he never gets that. Like, I'm sure he's never heard that in his life, right? So I'm like, I need you to like hook us up. Like, we need to meet each other, but I didn't.
Yeah, you could have went and got coffee with Drew, man.
Oh, don't even right now, Jude. I might burst into tears.
I was trying to pull up. I actually took a picture of the Eubanks poster at some point on one of our episodes way back in the day. I actually pulled it out and put it on screen. So y'all got to dig in the SSPN archives to go find that.
Mhm.
But I took a picture of that just to joke and send it to my friends today. And I was trying to pull it up, but it was on my Discord, and then it was like it was
Mhm.
downloading an update, and I didn't want to, mess with the stream. But I was trying to pull it up and like put it on screen, but
All as well.
maybe next time we'll try to have that. If Eubanks has at least double digits in one of the games against us, then I'll take it off, or I'll put the picture up. Or actually, you know what? I will do the work, and I will take it off the wall, and I will
Mm.
put it down and show it to you guys.
Sounds like they're seeing it. That's all I'm hearing.
For those of y'all who don't know what I'm referring to, I have a signed Drew Eubanks poster on my wall from a good friend of mine who did some training work with the Spurs, and he got that for me. So Drew Eubanks' signature lives in the SSPN studios. Never forget.
Bro's averaging 5 points, 4 boards on 63% shooting.
That
Oh,
sounds like Barlow.
Barlow wouldn't even 63.
Eubanks could never score 30 in the G League.
He did several times. Don't even shoot. Don't
Did he
even get
really?
into that. He was like Mr. G League back in the day.
I
That's
don't
why
remember it.
that's why every time like we talk about the G League, I'm like, let's not forget who dominated the G League. Drew Eubanks. He was like
I do remember
career.
he was in Austin. That's right. That's how it's actually the same way Dom earned a contract. Oh my gosh. He was undrafted and we signed him on the two-way. I'm remembering that. He was the first two-way.
Exactly. And he was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in the G League. Remember his hook shots? He was just hooking people to death.
I
Telling you,
stand corrected. I stand corrected.
don't test
Okay.
me.
But in all seriousness, that actually no, because like that could be a problem. As much as we're joking about Drew Eubanks, bro. No, but seriously, against Zach Collins, like he's gonna play him hard. They're former teammates. We've seen it with former Spurs before, and if you have to pick at one of Zach's weaknesses, you could say it would be physicality, and especially coming off a concussion as well. I mean, maybe if he plays Friday, we'll see, but the bench has got to play well, and
Mm,
if the interior, you got to get the boards on on the bench.
telling you, man.
Call me crazy though, but seriously, the physicality that could be a thing against
Absolutely.
Zach.
In the first game this season against the Spurs, my guy had 3 points, 9 boards, 4 assists, and a couple blocks. Just easy work. And then the next game,
Sounds
he
like
had
a Barlow stat line. I'm not
yeah,
even
right.
lying.
He
It
had
does.
13 points and 5 boards on 100% shooting. That's my guy right there.
I feel like that's what's incoming in at least one of them. He's going to play hard against us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's dunking on somebody. That's a guarantee.
we got to go check his contract. Now I'm just like, do we scratch everything and bring Eubanks back next season?
I think so.
You're convincing me, Ethan. You're convincing me. Okay, to wrap this up, though, any final thoughts on the Grizzlies game and the Suns game going into the weekend?
I think there's a chance we can go 2-1 this weekend, Jude, and that's saying something.
Yeah, I don't feel confident in it, but I don't disagree that there's a chance. So we'll have to see. I definitely feel more confident in the Grizzlies game than the two Suns games. And I also, as much as I do think there is a chance that the Spurs could split the Suns games, I think that also the Suns will be wanting that they will be doing everything in their power, like you were saying, not just for the playoff race, but also so they don't lose the season series to the Spurs. They have to win both of these games, to not have that on their resume, if you will.
For sure. Good point.
But that pretty much wraps it up, Ethan. Any other final Spurs thoughts? Oh, wait. Well, here, you answer that. There's one more thing we got to do.
Drew Eubanks is under contract for another season after this one, so we're going to have to wait a little bit.
It'd be like that, Ethan. But you know what we don't have to wait for?
What's that?
The Austin Spurs.
I
I don't have anything else. It's just you don't have to wait for the Austin Spurs because we're going to talk about them right now just to do a little update. CD Sissoko has really been filling up the stat sheet, if you will. So we'll go ahead and look at some of his past games here. This was a close game, lost by 4. Maybe if Barlow plays, that's kind of the difference. That was literally like a daily game plan thing that got kind of flipped on its head because of Zach's concussion. But look at CD Sissoko, man. Yes, there's the 5 turnovers there. You can look at the -11 and went 1 for 6 from 3. But we're going to go through some games here. He had a 5 for 6 from 5 for 6 from 3 game recently. And still, not the worst shooting night on the planet. Yes, it's 5 for 12, but still found a way to get 13, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 9 boards, 4 rebounds. You look at everything on the box score, Ethan, you see him filling up something. And I think that is that's just a testament to kind of his play style and the way that he is just really a hustle player and fills in the gaps.
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about him at length and just the raw athleticism and skill that he possesses is unlike a lot of players in the league nowadays. For someone at his size to be only 19 years old still, right? Or is he 20?
He doesn't turn 20 until April.
Still 19 years old, to be as physically intimidating, strong, and athletic as he is, with the vision that he has, the ability to get downhill in transition, dunk over people. He's taking strides as a 3-point shooter. He's not a sniper yet. Obviously, I know there's some people that comment say he's bad at shooting. He's not bad. He's just inconsistent right now. It's a game-to-game basis for him. But there's room for improvement. And to me, his biggest thing is the vision that he possesses. I mean, we talk about him. We compared him to Jeremy a little bit, compared him to Boris Diaw a little bit, but just way better athleticism and physicality. I think both of those comparisons are valid, but he puts the ball on the floor in a different way than both of those guys. I think his handle's honestly maybe even slightly better than Jeremy's at this point. And Boris had a sneaky handle, but he wasn't really facing you up, taking it full court and beating you off the dribble. He was using savvy and his size to kind of get himself and others open. I think CD Sissoko has the opportunity to, eventually get to that level where he can take guys off the dribble, bop, bop, high screen and roll with Victor Wembanyama and others and make a play for himself and other guys coming off that screen.
He's got a lot of skill and finesse. It's not perfect. It's not completely honed at this point, but he's got a lot of skill and finesse for someone with his size.
Yes, 1,000%. 1,000%.
But the more thing that I was the thing that I was kind of trying to point out with this type of game is you just see him filling up the stat sheet. And y'all got to go check out his posters as well. But just to look at some of the other games that the Austin Spurs have had recently, of course, I can't go look up their game page because ESPN doesn't want to do that. But before we move on, another solid game from David Duke Jr. as well. 20 points, 10 rebounds. Raekwon Gray, one of our other new two-way signings. Nothing crazy, but 5 boards, three assists, 3 steals, 11 points. Not the craziest game from Jamari Booyah, but he's actually had some really solid games as of late, which we'll get into here. But we're just going to look at some of these Austin Spurs games just to give you all an update on some of our two-way guys before we wrap this up. Believe they played. Okay, so that was played before that on Sunday, and this is when CD Sissoko was the leading scorer here for the Austin Spurs. I believe he was off the bench as well. Went 5 for 6 from 3, plus 20 in the box score, 5 assists, 3 steals, 3 boards, 22 overall. So the majority of his points there, 15 of those 22 points, came from the 3-point line. Obviously, still some consistency. We need that to happen. But I personally, I've seen his jumper. I think there's some potential there. It's not a finished product. It's going to take some time. But I think he has potential to be a 3-level scorer. I know he's a second-round pick, but there's a reason that we signed him to a full 3-year contract before this season. I don't want to repeat myself, with every single episode saying that. But at the same time, that there's a reason. There's a reason we signed him to a full contract. And other guys who had been on the team for multiple years didn't get that. And a lot of other second-round picks, for reference, do end up getting 2 ways. So this was a really solid game for him that ended up leading to a win. And of course, David Duke Jr. also had another solid game, 22 points, 7 boards, 4 assists. And I believe this game, they say that Jamari Booyah on the stat sheet here, Ethan, only has 1 steal. But I believe, and I'm pretty sure I texted you this also, I think he had 9 steals in this game. I know if you're listening to this, you're going to be like, that only says 1. What are you talking about? Go to the NBA G League's Twitter, scroll down for a little bit, and you'll see that same tweet. I'm actually going to go look in our messages right now just to confirm that, because I believe it was a G League record, they said.
What the hell? It's weird they'd get something that drastically wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, here it is. I'm not crazy, but I think it might have been, okay, I think this might have been a little bit, this was Saturday, so this game was on Sunday. Yes, so I do have this wrong. It was not this game, it was the game before, but he also only had 9 points and 10 assists in that game. I know that's not the exact same numbers, but it was kind of similar numbers to the one that we have up here, so that's why I got a little confused. And it was also a back-to-back win for the Austin Spurs, so we'll go ahead and look at that, Ethan. Hamidou Diallo, also, you may remember him from the Thunder. He was going off in both games. He had 34 in this one, which was actually at the Moody Center. And then he had 41 in the other, but we still managed to win. And here's the 9-steal game from Jamari Booyah, which was tied a G League record. So as much as he hasn't been shooting as well as he was before we signed him, I think that's probably because he's having to play next to David Duke Jr., who had 30 in this game. So there's a little bit of an adjustment there, but he's getting assists, he's distributing, and when you have 9 steals in a game, that's what you want to see if you're not playing well offensively.
1,000%. And just to touch on Mr. Sissoko in this game as well, 25 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists on 2 of 4 shooting from 3. So he's definitely making strides in that area, Jude. And his jumper, I would agree with you, it looks pretty good. Like, he can become a better shooter. It's not completely broken. And he's a lefty. And when's the last time you saw a lefty that's a bad shooter?
I think he's right-handed.
Oh, he is?
Yeah, he is.
What did I think he was left-handed?
I'm not sure.
Well, I'm dumb.
It's okay.
Anyway,
I know what you're saying though, because left-handers are not bad shooters. But
other than Rudy Gobert, name a Frenchman that's a bad shooter. There we go. That's a better one.
Let's see, Nick Batum, Evan Fournier, Victor.
Even TP had a couple good years there.
That's true. Tony, Boris could stretch the floor a little bit.
He could knock it down.
Especially the mid-range. We could talk about that for forever, but wanted to pull up some of these G League stats for you guys because obviously David Duke Jr. and CD Sissoko are really looking solid. I know that Jamari Booyah was signed on a what's the word? A 2-year deal, a 2-year two-way deal. I think that will happen for David Duke Jr. as well if he doesn't even maybe end up earning like a third string spot.
Look at that. You never know. We'll be watching.
But good development from David Duke and CD Sissoko as well. And even before then, there were some other games, but since we went through 3, I felt like that was enough. There were some other games where Raekwon Gray has had like 30 plus. That was even before he was on the two-way, but I believe he had like some, at least like 1 or 2 20-point games since being signed as well. And he's somebody too, like they play him at the 5 a lot because he's like 250 or something, but he's 6'7", can put the ball on the floor. There's a lot of guys that are ahead of him right now, but I wouldn't hate if there's an injury situation. Like I wouldn't mind just throwing him out there at the 4 a little bit. But as I'm saying that, I'm realizing I don't even know what he's going to look like in the NBA. That could be a completely different scenario. Let me stop myself a little bit. But I think that he definitely has the frame and also the skill set. He can put the ball on the floor. He's mobile with his size to maybe be a 4 option moving forward. But I still think that obviously David Duke Jr. and CD Sissoko are kind of the main 2 bright spots for the Austin Spurs right now.
Couldn't agree more.
Alrighty, y'all. That wraps it up. Thanks for hanging out with us for about an hour here. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to hit like and subscribe below. If you want to support the show, you can go ahead and follow us on Twitter at SSPN at Jude McLaren, at Ethan_Quintero. You can stay updated with all of the latest videos and stuff that we're putting out. And also, if you want to support the channel, go ahead and check out our merch. We've got the link in the description. Me and Ethan are both wearing our hats right now. As you can see, Ethan's hat, it matches the San Antonio City edition. It's a little bit different, but still for the most part, it's the same vibe. So if you'd like to support the channel, definitely scan that QR code or hit the link in the description. We appreciate y'all. Go Spurs, go. We'll catch y'all next week.